Wait, you're putting that inside me? Gasped the towering black woman as the diminutive cowboy revealed a mysterious wooden box on their wedding night. The pale, colossal bride froze as the mountain man, smaller than a fence post, began unfastening its bronze clasp. The townspeople of Dusty Gulch had mocked this mismatched pair for weeks, snickering at the giant mail-order bride who'd surely crush her tiny husband or flee back east within days. They assumed she'd crumble under frontier pressure like all the other delicate city women. But the weathered rancher hadn't chosen randomly. His vast empire teetered on the edge of a territorial deadline, threatened by a ruthless land baron's scheme. This unconventional partnership held secrets that could either save everything he'd built or destroy them both. Would the wooden box's contents seal their doom or unlock an impossible salvation? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The stagecoach wheels kicked up dust as they rolled into Dusty Gulch. Odette Jackson pressed her face against the window, watching the small frontier town emerge from the Montana wilderness. Her hands trembled as she smoothed her best dress over her long frame. The coach lurched to a stop. Odette took a deep breath and stepped down onto the wooden platform. A collective gasp rose from the gathered crowd. She stood 6 feet and 3 inches tall, towering over every person in sight. Her dark skin gleamed in the afternoon sun as she straightened to her full height. The townspeople stared with wide eyes and open mouths. "Good Lord," whispered an elderly woman. "That's the biggest gal I ever seen." "Poor little Tobias," chuckled a man in overalls. "He bit off more than he can chew with this one." "She'll probably eat him for breakfast," snorted another. Odette's cheeks burned. The familiar shame crept up her spine like it had countless times in New Orleans. She'd fled Louisiana after 3 failed courtships, each ending when suitors took one look at her unusual size and walked away. Her stepmother's words echoed in her mind. "You're unnatural, girl. No decent man wants a woman who makes him look like a child." The crowd parted as a figure approached. Tobias McGraw stood barely 5 feet 4 inches, his weathered face creased by years of frontier sun. His boots were worn but expensive. His clothes were simple but well made. He removed his hat and nodded respectfully. "Miss Jackson." "Mr. McGraw." Odette's voice came out smaller than intended. The townspeople snickered behind their hands. Some pointed openly. A group of children giggled until their mothers shushed them. Tobias helped her into his carriage without comment. As they rode through town, more people stopped to stare. Odette sank lower in her seat with each passing moment. "They're all looking," she whispered. "Let them look." Tobias's voice carried quiet confidence. "They'll see what I see soon enough." The carriage climbed a winding path away from town. Odette expected to find a modest homestead tucked into the hills. Instead, a vast ranch spread before them like something from a dream. Hundreds of cattle dotted the rolling pastures. Barns and outbuildings stretched across the landscape. Dozens of ranch hands worked among the herds. The main house sat proud and solid, built from local stone and timber. "This is all yours?" Odette asked. "Ours now," Tobias replied, "if you'll have it." A group of workers paused to watch them pass. Unlike the townspeople, these men showed respect for their boss despite his small stature. They tipped their hats and returned to work without lingering stares. Doc Sarah Mitchell waited on the front porch. The territory's only female doctor had kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. "Welcome to Montana," Doc Mitchell said warmly. "I'll be performing your ceremony." The wedding took place in the ranch house parlor as the sun began to set. Doc Mitchell spoke the traditional words while Tobias and Odette stood side by side. No other witnesses attended. Odette barely heard the vows. Her mind raced with questions about this strange arrangement. Why would a successful rancher need a mail-order bride? Why had he chosen her when any woman in town would have accepted his proposal? "You may kiss the bride," Doc Mitchell announced. Tobias leaned up and pressed a gentle kiss to Odette's cheek. She felt nothing but confusion. After Doc Mitchell departed, Tobias led Odette upstairs to the master bedroom. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace. Candles cast dancing shadows on the walls. "I have something for you," Tobias said. He moved to a wooden chest in the corner and withdrew a carved box. The bronze clasp gleamed in the firelight as he turned toward her. Odette's heart pounded. She'd heard whispered stories from other women about wedding nights, about what men expected from their wives, about duties she'd never imagined having to perform. Tobias approached slowly, the box held carefully in his hands. His expression was serious, but not unkind. "I need to put this inside you," he said quietly. Odette's breath caught in her throat. Her entire body went rigid with fear and confusion. The box seemed to pulse with mysterious intent in the flickering light. "Wait," her voice cracked. "You're putting that inside me?" She backed toward the door, her mind spinning with panic. This wasn't what she'd expected. This wasn't what any of her letters had prepared her for. Tobias stopped moving. He watched her carefully, as if measuring her reaction to some kind of test. The wooden box remained closed in his hands. Whatever lay inside would determine whether her desperate gamble on a new life had been worth taking. Whether she'd found salvation in the Montana wilderness, or walked straight into something far worse than the rejection she'd left behind. The fire popped and hissed in the silence between them. Outside, cattle lowed in the distance, and wind whistled through the eaves of the great house. Odette pressed her back against the bedroom door, trapped between the unknown contents of that mysterious box and a return to the shame and loneliness that had driven her west. Her new husband stood motionless, waiting for her decision. Tobias set the wooden box on the bedside table. His weathered hands moved to the bronze clasp with deliberate care. The metal clicked softly as it opened. "This isn't what you think," he said gently. Odette remained pressed against the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. Every muscle in her body coiled for flight. Tobias lifted the lid. Inside lay a thick stack of legal documents bound with red ribbon. Beside them sat an ornate brass key and a leather portfolio embossed with territorial seals. "Partnership papers," Tobias explained. "For the ranch, for everything." Odette blinked in confusion. "Partnership papers?" "The territorial government passed new land laws last spring." Tobias pulled out the documents. "Only married couples can hold claims larger than 640 acres. Pemberton's been using it to force out every unmarried rancher in the territory." He spread the papers across the quilt. Maps showed property boundaries stretching for miles in every direction. Legal descriptions outlined water rights, mineral claims, and grazing permits worth more than most people saw in a lifetime. "I don't need a wife," Tobias continued. "I need a business partner who happens to be my wife." The words hit Odette like cold water. "You married me for legal papers? I married you because you're exactly what this place needs." Tobias met her eyes directly. "Your letters showed intelligence, determination, the will to survive when everything goes wrong." Odette thought back to those letters she'd written from her cramped New Orleans boarding house. She'd been honest about her struggles, about being abandoned by family who found her too tall, too strong, too different for polite society. "Every other woman who answered my advertisement wanted romance," Tobias said. "Pretty words about love at first sight. You wrote about practical things, about wanting a real partnership, about being tired of people who couldn't see past appearances." He pulled out another document, a bank statement showing deposits that made Odette's knees weak. The McGraw Ranch wasn't just successful, it was wealthy beyond anything she'd imagined. "My first wife came from back east," Tobias said quietly. "Sweet girl, delicate as a flower. The isolation broke her spirit before the consumption took her body. Montana killed her as sure as a bullet would have." Odette remembered her own strength, how she'd survived Hurricane Camille in New Orleans by organizing her entire neighborhood's evacuation, how she'd secretly managed her stepfather's shipping business after he took ill, handling ledgers and negotiations while he recovered. "I can't afford another delicate flower," Tobias continued. "This land demands strength. The winters here will freeze a weak woman solid. The summers will bake her into dust. I need someone who can handle cattle drives and territorial politics and Clarence Pemberton's tricks. Who's Pemberton? Odette asked. Land speculator from back east. He's been buying up failed ranches for pennies on the dollar. Then he sells them to railroad companies for massive profits. Tobias pointed to markings on one of the maps. He's already taken the Morrison place in the Hendricks spread. We're next on his list. The brass key caught the firelight as Tobias lifted it from the box. This opens the ranch safe. Half of everything in there becomes yours the moment you sign these papers. Odette stepped away from the door. The documents drew her forward like a magnet. Column after column of figures showed profits from cattle sales, land leases, and mineral rights. You're offering me half of all this? I'm offering you the chance to be what you already are, Tobias said. A woman strong enough to build something that lasts. Memories flooded back. Her stepfather teaching her to read shipping manifests when she was 12. The way dock workers had listened when she gave orders, respecting her natural authority. How she'd negotiated better rates with cotton merchants while her stepfather watched in amazement. The territorial deadline is 6 weeks away, Tobias explained. If Pemberton can prove our marriage isn't legitimate, he gets everything. The house, the land, the cattle, all of it goes to public auction. How does he prove that? By showing we're business partners instead of a real married couple. Tobias gathered the papers carefully. He's already got people in town asking questions, watching how we act together, looking for evidence. Odette understood now. The stakes were enormous, not just for Tobias but for her too. If they failed, she'd return to New Orleans with nothing. Worse than nothing. She'd be known as the woman who couldn't even make a frontier marriage work. But if they succeeded, she'd become something she'd never dared imagine. A landowner, a businesswoman, a person of real influence and respect. What do you need from me? She asked. Everything you've got, Tobias replied. Your intelligence, your strength, your ability to see solutions other people miss. He paused. And convincing performances when Pemberton's spies are watching. The leather portfolio contained ranch ledgers going back 5 years. Odette opened it and scanned the columns of figures. Her mind immediately grasped the patterns, seasonal fluctuations in cattle prices, strategic timing of land purchases, careful management of cash reserves. You handle the books yourself, she observed. Until now. Tobias handed her a pen. Sign at the bottom of page 12. Your signature makes you an equal partner in everything. Odette stared at the document. Her entire future balanced on the tip of that pen. Behind her lay rejection and loneliness. Ahead stretched possibility beyond her wildest dreams. She signed her name with bold, confident strokes. 3 months of Montana sun had bronzed Odette's skin and strengthened her already powerful frame. She rode alongside Tobias through the north pasture, checking fence lines and counting cattle with practiced eyes. The ranch hands had stopped staring weeks ago. Now they tipped their hats respectfully when she passed. They'd learned she could read cattle prices better than most stockyard dealers and spot sick animals from 100 yards away. 40 head missing from the upper section, she reported, closing her leather-bound ledger. Rustlers? Tobias asked. Water. They've drifted south toward Miller Creek. Odette pointed toward distant hills. The drought's pushing them off their usual grazing grounds. The territory hadn't seen decent rain in 2 months. Rivers ran shallow and springs dried up completely. Other ranchers had already started selling cattle early rather than watch them starve. Back at the ranch house, Odette spread territorial maps across the dining table. Her correspondence training from New Orleans proved invaluable as she drafted letters to government officials about water rights and emergency grazing permits. Doc Mitchell arrived just as Odette sealed the last envelope. "How are you settling in?" Doc asked, accepting a cup of coffee. "Better than I expected," Odette replied honestly. "The town's talking." Doc Mitchell's expression grew serious. Not all of it friendly. Through the window, Odette watched Tobias working with a new horse in the corral. His small stature meant nothing when dealing with animals. They responded to his quiet confidence and steady hands. "What kind of talk?" Odette asked. "Pemberton's been asking questions. About your marriage. Whether it's real or just a business arrangement." Doc Mitchell stirred her coffee slowly. Some folks think you two seem more like partners than husband and wife. Heat crept up Odette's neck. She and Tobias had maintained separate bedrooms since their wedding night. Their relationship had grown into genuine friendship and mutual respect, but romance remained carefully unspoken between them. "We work well together," Odette said carefully. "That's exactly the problem." Doc Mitchell leaned forward. "Pemberton's looking for proof that your marriage is fraudulent. The way you two handle business so professionally makes his case stronger." A commotion outside interrupted their conversation. Ranch hands shouted orders as dust clouds rose from the southern pastures. Tobias came running toward the house, his face grim. "Storm spooked the main herd," he called. "They've scattered toward Devil's Canyon." Odette knew the danger immediately. Devil's Canyon was a maze of narrow passages and steep drops. Cattle could easily become trapped or fall to their deaths. Losing the main herd would bankrupt the ranch overnight. "How many hands do we have available?" she asked. "6, not nearly enough for a full roundup." Thunder rumbled in the distance. The approaching storm that had scattered the cattle now threatened to make recovery impossible. Rain would turn the canyon trails into deadly mudslides. "I'm coming with you," Odette announced. Tobias shook his head. "It's too dangerous. Those canyon walls are treacherous even in good weather." "You need every rider you can get." Odette was already moving toward the door. "And I know those cattle better than anyone except you." 20 minutes later, Odette sat astride Thunder, a massive black gelding that perfectly matched her size and strength. The other riders looked skeptical but said nothing. Their jobs depended on saving that herd. The scattered cattle had spread across 3 miles of broken terrain. Some had already entered the canyon's mouth, drawn by the promise of shelter from the approaching storm. Their panicked lowing echoed off the rock walls like ghostly warnings. "We'll work in teams," Tobias called over the wind. "Rodriguez and Thompson take the east side. Miller and Johnson go west. Odette and I will handle the canyon mouth." Lightning flashed overhead as they rode hard toward the rocky entrance. Odette counted at least 50 head of cattle milling around in confusion. More disappeared deeper into the maze with every passing minute. "I'll ride point," she told Tobias. "You bring up the rear." "Odette, you've never done a canyon drive before." "I organized dock evacuations during Hurricane Camille," she replied. "Same principle. Control the panic and funnel them towards safety." She spurred Thunder forward into the canyon. The big horse responded to her commands perfectly, dancing around loose rocks and navigating narrow passages with sure-footed grace. Years of managing her stepfather's shipping operations had taught her to stay calm under pressure and think strategically about moving large groups efficiently. The first group of cattle saw her coming and tried to bolt deeper into the canyon. Odette cut them off expertly, using Thunder's size and speed to turn them back toward the entrance. Her voice carried clearly over the storm as she called out directions. "Push them left. Watch that mare with the white blaze. She's the leader." One by one, the scattered cattle began moving in the right direction. Odette's natural authority and quick thinking kept the operation organized, even as rain began falling in heavy sheets. A massive steer tried to break away from the group, heading straight for a narrow ledge that would trap him permanently. Odette reacted instantly, guiding Thunder in a wide arc that cut off the steer's escape route and forced him back with the others. "How'd you learn to read cattle like that?" Tobias shouted over the rain. "Same way I learned to read dock workers," she called back. "Find the leaders and the rest will follow." By nightfall, they'd recovered nearly all the scattered animals. Odette rode back to the ranch house soaked to the skin, but glowing with accomplishment. The ranch hands who doubted her now looked at her with genuine admiration. That night, Doc Mitchell stayed for dinner and witnessed something that made her smile. Tobias and Odette sat close together, discussing the day's events with the easy familiarity of true partners. When Odette laughed at one of his stories, Tobias's face lit up in a way that had nothing to do with business. 3 days later, a formal letter arrived from the territorial courthouse. Judge Morrison would hold hearings in 2 weeks to examine the legitimacy of several recent marriages. The McGraw Union topped the list of cases under investigation. Clarence Pemberton's legal challenge had officially begun. Clarence Pemberton arrived in Dusty Gulch with 3 lawyers and a wagon full of documents. His expensive Eastern suit and polished shoes made him stand out like a peacock among prairie chickens. Word spread quickly that he'd taken rooms at the town's only hotel. Odette watched from the general store window as Pemberton's entourage marched toward the courthouse. His lead attorney carried a leather satchel that bulged with what could only be evidence against her marriage. "He's been planning this for months," Doc Mitchell said quietly beside her. "Maybe longer." "Planning what exactly?" Odette asked. "The systematic destruction of every large ranch in the territory." Doc's voice carried bitter knowledge. "He did the same thing in Colorado and Wyoming, uses legal technicalities to force sales, then flips the land to railroad companies for 10 times what he paid." That evening, Pemberton himself appeared at the ranch house door. He removed his hat with exaggerated politeness and smiled like a snake preparing to strike. "Mr. and Mrs. McGraw," he said smoothly. "I thought we should meet before the hearing." Tobias kept his hand near his rifle but maintained civility. "What do you want, Pemberton?" "To offer you a fair deal." Pemberton pulled out an official-looking document. "I'll buy your ranch for market value. No legal proceedings. No public embarrassment. You keep your dignity, and I get the land." Odette studied the contract over Tobias's shoulder. The offered price was less than half what the ranch was actually worth. "That's your idea of fair?" she asked. Pemberton's smile widened. "More than you'll get at auction after I prove your marriage is fraudulent." "Our marriage is perfectly legal," Tobias replied. "Legal, perhaps, but genuine?" Pemberton's eyes glittered with malicious confidence. "I have witnesses who will testify you maintain separate bedrooms, business correspondence that reads more like a corporate merger than a romance, financial records showing this arrangement benefits you both in very convenient ways." Heat rose in Odette's chest, but she kept her voice level. "What witnesses?" "Hotel staff from your wedding night, ranch hands who've observed your interactions, townspeople who've watched you conduct yourselves more like business partners than newlyweds." Pemberton tucked the contract back into his coat. "The territorial government takes marriage fraud very seriously, especially when it involves land claims worth hundreds of thousands of dollars." After Pemberton left, Odette and Tobias sat in heavy silence. The magnitude of their situation was becoming clear. They'd built an effective partnership, but failed to create the appearance of a romantic marriage. "He's not wrong," Tobias said finally. "We do act more like business associates than husband and wife." "Because that's what we are," Odette replied. "That's what you said you wanted." "I know what I said." Tobias stared into the fireplace. "But the law requires more than just legal papers and shared profits." The next morning brought more bad news. Ranch hand Charlie Rodriguez pulled Tobias aside with a worried expression. "Boss, that Pemberton fella's been talking to the boys, offering money for information about you and the missus." "What kind of information?" "Personal stuff. Whether you share a bedroom. How you act when you think nobody's watching. Whether you seem like a real married couple or just business partners." Tobias felt his stomach drop. "Did anyone take his money?" "Thompson did." Charlie looked ashamed. "Said he needed the cash for his sick daughter. But he ain't the only one Pemberton approached." That afternoon, Odette discovered the full extent of Pemberton's investigation. A stranger had been asking questions at the general store about her shopping habits. Did she buy personal items that suggested intimate married life? Did she seem happy or merely resigned to her situation? The town dressmaker reported similar inquiries. Had Mrs. McGraw purchased any items appropriate for a proper wedding night? Did she carry herself like a woman in love or a woman fulfilling a business obligation? Even worse, Pemberton had obtained copies of their original correspondence. The letters Odette had written were practical and businesslike. She'd focused on her qualifications and experience rather than romantic feelings. To an outside observer, they read exactly like job applications. "We're in real trouble," Odette admitted that evening. They sat together in the parlor, surrounded by legal documents and preparing their defense. But the evidence against them was mounting faster than they could counter it. "Maybe we should take his offer," Tobias said reluctantly. "Cut our losses and start over somewhere else." "With what?" Odette's voice carried steel. He's offering half of what this place is worth. After expenses and taxes, we'd have barely enough to buy a small farm back east. Better than losing everything. I didn't come this far to quit at the first real challenge. Odette stood and began pacing. There has to be another way. Doc Mitchell arrived the next morning with more disturbing news. Pemberton had visited her office, asking pointed questions about the McGraw marriage from a medical perspective. He wanted to know if I'd treated you for any conditions that would indicate normal married relations, Doc said bluntly. I told him medical information was confidential, but he just smiled like he already knew the answer. The hearing was scheduled for Monday morning. They had 3 days to find evidence that their marriage was genuine rather than a business arrangement. 3 days to prove that partnership and profit didn't preclude real affection. But as Odette looked around the ranch house they'd built together, she realized something important had been growing between them without either acknowledging it. Respect had deepened into genuine care. Partnership had blossomed into something that felt suspiciously like love. The question was whether they could convince a territorial judge of what they were only beginning to admit to themselves. Pemberton's trap was closing around them, but Odette McGraw had survived hurricanes, family rejection, and social ridicule. She wasn't about to let a greedy land speculator destroy the first real home she'd ever known. The fight for their future was about to begin. The territorial courthouse filled to capacity on Monday morning. Judge Morrison, a weathered man with iron-gray hair, presided from behind an imposing oak bench. The air crackled with tension as spectators pressed into every available seat. Pemberton's legal team occupied the front row, their expensive suits and leather portfolios radiating confidence. 3 witnesses sat nearby, ready to testify about the fraudulent nature of the McGraw marriage. Odette and Tobias entered together, their hands briefly touching as they took their seats. The gesture was small but genuine. Several townspeople noticed and whispered among themselves. This hearing will determine the legitimacy of the marriage between Tobias McGraw and Odette Jackson McGraw, Judge Morrison announced. If the union is found to be fraudulent for the purpose of circumventing territorial land laws, the McGraw ranch will be subject to immediate seizure and public auction. Pemberton's lead attorney, a thin man named Whitman, rose first. His opening statement painted the McGraws as calculating opportunists who'd married purely for financial gain. The evidence will show this union was arranged solely to exploit territorial marriage requirements, Whitman declared. These parties maintain separate bedrooms, conduct themselves as business associates rather than spouses, and entered this arrangement with purely mercenary motives. He called his first witness. Thompson, the ranch hand who'd taken Pemberton's money, testified reluctantly about the couple's professional demeanor. His voice shook as he described their business-focused conversations in separate living quarters. I never seen them act like husband and wife, Thompson mumbled. More like folks working together on a deal. The hotel clerk who'd served them on their wedding night confirmed they'd requested separate rooms initially. The general store owner testified that their purchases seemed practical rather than personal. Each witness added another brick to Pemberton's wall of evidence. Whitman produced the original correspondence between Odette and Tobias. He read excerpts aloud, emphasizing the business-like tone and practical focus. The letters sounded cold and calculating when stripped of context. Note the complete absence of romantic sentiment, Whitman observed. These communications read like employment negotiations, not courtship. Judge Morrison examined the documents with a frown. The evidence was damaging and difficult to refute. Tobias took the stand in his own defense. His attorney, a local man named Garrett, guided him through basic questions about his motivations and feelings. Why did you choose to marry Miss Jackson? Garrett asked. She was the strongest woman who answered my advertisement, Tobias replied honestly. Montana requires strength. I'd learned that the hard way. Did you have feelings for her when you proposed? Tobias hesitated. I had respect for her. Admiration for her courage in leaving everything behind to start over. But no romantic love? Not at first. Tobias looked directly at Odette. That came later. Whitman's cross-examination was brutal. He forced Tobias to admit the marriage had been strategically timed to meet territorial deadlines. He highlighted the separate bedrooms and business-focused relationship. By the time he finished, Tobias looked defeated. Doc Mitchell testified about frontier marriages and their practical nature. She explained how survival often mattered more than romance in territorial life. But Whitman countered by noting that other couples managed both love and practicality. Several ranch hands spoke in support of the McGraws, describing their effective partnership and growing affection. But their testimony was undermined by Thompson's earlier statements about the couple's businesslike behavior. Finally, Judge Morrison called Odette to the stand. She walked forward with quiet dignity, her tall frame commanding attention. The packed courtroom fell silent as she was sworn in. Garrett began gently, asking about her background and motivations for coming west. Odette spoke honestly about her rejection by New Orleans society and her desperate hope for a new beginning. "What attracted you to Mr. McGraw's proposal?" Garrett asked. "His honesty," Odette replied. "He didn't promise romance or pretty lies. He offered partnership with someone who needed my strengths rather than someone who'd be ashamed of them." "Has your relationship evolved since your marriage?" "Yes." Odette's voice grew stronger. Partnership became friendship. Friendship became respect. Respect became something deeper. "Are you in love with your husband?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Odette looked across the courtroom at Tobias, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes and the hope he was trying to hide. "I love what we've built together," she said carefully. "I love the life we've created. I love the man who saw strength where others saw only strangeness." Whitman rose for cross-examination like a hawk diving on prey. He hammered at the practical origins of their relationship and the separate bedrooms. He forced her to admit their correspondence had focused on business rather than romance. "You married for legal advantage, didn't you, Mrs. McGraw?" "I married for survival," Odette replied, "same as most women on the frontier. But not for love. Love has many forms, Mr. Whitman. The poets write about passion and grand gestures. But there's also the love that grows from shared struggles and mutual respect, from building something together that neither could create alone." Her voice gained power as she continued. "You ask if our marriage is real. Judge it not by whether we share a bedroom or exchange romantic letters. Judge it by what we've accomplished together, by how we've supported each other through drought and hardship, by the home we've built and the future we're creating." The courtroom buzzed with murmurs of agreement. Several women nodded approvingly at her words. "We may have married for practical reasons," Odette concluded, "but we've stayed married by choice. Every day we choose to be partners. Every day we choose to face the world together. If that's not real marriage, then I don't know what is." Judge Morrison called for a brief recess to consider the testimony. As the crowd dispersed, Tobias approached Odette with tears in his eyes. "Did you mean what you said up there?" Every word. The future of their ranch hung in the balance, but something more important had just been decided in that moment of truth. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Morrison returned to his bench. His weathered face revealed nothing as he shuffled through the testimony papers one final time. Odette felt Tobias's hand slip into hers under the table. "This case presents a fundamental question about the nature of marriage in frontier society," Judge Morrison began. "Mr. Whitman argues that practical arrangements cannot constitute legitimate unions. That romance must precede partnership for a marriage to be valid." Pemberton leaned forward in his seat, confidence radiating from his expensive suit. His witnesses sat smugly, certain their testimony had sealed the McGraw's fate. "However," the judge continued, "this court recognizes that frontier life demands different standards than Eastern society. Survival often takes precedence over sentiment. Partnership can be as binding as passion." Odette's heart hammered against her ribs. The judge's words could swing either direction. "The evidence shows the McGraw marriage began as a practical arrangement. Separate quarters were maintained. Business dominated their interactions. Financial advantage clearly motivated both parties." Whitman smiled and began organizing his papers for victory. Pemberton actually chuckled under his breath. Judge Morrison raised his voice. "But the evidence also shows genuine partnership evolving into deeper connection. Mrs. McGraw's testimony demonstrated real affection and commitment. Mr. McGraw's obvious devotion to his wife was clear to everyone in this courtroom." The judge stood, commanding absolute attention. More importantly, this court has uncovered disturbing evidence about Mr. Pemberton's activities throughout this territory. Pemberton's smile vanished. His lawyers exchanged worried glances. Investigation reveals a pattern of land speculation using manufactured legal challenges, Judge Morrison declared. Mr. Pemberton has systematically targeted successful ranchers across 3 territories, using marriage technicalities to force property sales at fraction of market value. Doc Mitchell had provided the crucial evidence the night before the hearing. Her medical records showed Pemberton had attempted similar schemes in Colorado and Wyoming, always targeting the most valuable properties with the same marriage fraud accusations. This court finds Clarence Pemberton guilty of conspiracy to defraud territorial landowners, Judge Morrison announced. His actions constitute a deliberate attempt to manipulate legal processes for personal enrichment. Pemberton shot to his feet. Your Honor, this is outrageous. I demand— You'll demand nothing in my courtroom, the judge cut him off. Bailiff, place Mr. Pemberton under arrest pending transfer to federal authorities. The bailiff moved swiftly as Pemberton's lawyers scrambled to distance themselves from their now toxic client. Shouts erupted from the gallery as townspeople realized they'd been witnessing a much larger conspiracy than a simple marriage dispute. Judge Morrison restored order with his gavel. As for the McGraw marriage, this court finds it legally valid and genuine. The union clearly serves legitimate purposes beyond mere land acquisition. The couple has demonstrated real partnership, mutual support, and growing affection. Relief flooded through Odette like warm honey. Tobias squeezed her hand so tightly she nearly winced. Furthermore, the judge continued, Mr. Pemberton's fraudulent activities invalidate his challenges to other territorial marriages. This court orders a full investigation into all land transfers resulting from his previous legal actions. The courtroom erupted in cheers. Ranch families who'd lost their land to Pemberton's schemes suddenly had hope for justice. Doc Mitchell wiped tears from her eyes as she watched the couple embrace. Tobias pulled Odette to her feet and kissed her properly for the first time. Not the gentle peck from their wedding ceremony, but a real kiss filled with months of suppressed emotion. The crowd cheered louder. I love you, Tobias whispered against her ear, not just as a partner. As my wife. I love you too, Odette replied, finally able to speak the truth she'd been hiding from herself. More than I ever thought possible. Outside the courthouse, the entire town of Dusty Gulch seemed to have gathered. People who'd initially mocked the mismatched couple now pressed forward with congratulations and apologies. Even Thompson approached shamefacedly to ask for his job back. We'll discuss it, Tobias said firmly, but not unkindly. Trust has to be rebuilt. The ride back to the ranch felt like a victory parade. Cattle grazed peacefully in pastures that would remain theirs forever. The house on the hill looked more beautiful than ever, no longer threatened by legal vultures. That evening they sat together on the front porch watching the sun set over their land. For the first time since their wedding night, conversation flowed easily without the weight of pretense. I have something for you, Tobias said, disappearing into the house. He returned with the same wooden box that had started everything. But this time, Odette felt no fear as he opened it. Inside lay a simple gold wedding ring and a deed with both their names listed as equal owners. Not partnership documents this time, but a real marriage certificate signed by Judge Morrison himself. I thought we should do this properly, Tobias said, slipping the ring onto her finger. No legal requirements or business arrangements, just a promise between us. 6 months later, Odette stood on the courthouse steps again. But this time she wore the territorial delegate badge Judge Morrison had pinned to her dress. Her pregnancy showed clearly beneath her best gown, and Tobias beamed with pride beside her. She'd been elected to represent their district in territorial government, running on a platform of protecting small ranchers from land speculation. Her victory had been overwhelming, carrying every precinct by wide margins. Ladies and gentlemen, she addressed the gathered crowd, her voice carrying clearly across the square. We've proven that worth isn't measured by appearance or background, but by character and capability. Tobias watched his wife command the crowd's attention with natural authority. The scared woman who'd stepped off the stagecoach had transformed into a leader whose influence stretched across the entire territory. Their partnership had indeed become something neither could have accomplished alone. Their marriage had grown from necessity into genuine love. Their future stretched ahead, filled with shared purpose and mutual devotion. The wooden box sat safely at home now, its contents replaced by baby clothes and territorial legislation. But Odette would always remember the night when fear had given way to possibility, when a desperate gamble had become the foundation of everything she'd never dared dream possible. Their love story would become legend throughout Montana, proving that the strongest foundations are built not on romance alone, but on respect, partnership, and the courage to see beyond society's narrow definitions of what makes a perfect match.